Let's go ahead and get started. First, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're located. Just an introduction, my name is Japel Lyles. I'm a solution consultant here at ServiceNow, specializing in ITOM. And today, I just wanted to mention that we do have the lines on today's call muted just to prevent any background noise, but definitely feel free to post any questions, any comments down in the chat box, and we'll make sure to get some answers for you if need be. But yeah, we have about an hour for this session, so I want to go ahead and jump right in because we have a lot of content to cover. This is just a quick safe harbor notice. As a precaution, we just provide this for any information that may contain forward-looking statements. This won't apply today since we'll be talking about what we do have available with service mapping with our Tokyo release. This is just a heads up in case we do have those presentations, those demonstrations that do have that forward-looking information. All right, now if you haven't attended a how-to session with us before, we do these sessions around differing topics. Today, obviously, we'll be focused more on service mapping. And I know some of you may be already familiar with the tools that we're discussing today. And if not, that's okay. We make sure to provide that step-by-step guidance along the way as we're going throughout this workshop. And my hope is that we spend most of our time today in our instance just to showcase some of these capabilities here. So first and foremost, we'll talk about the value of service mapping, how your organization can find value in it by being service aware, getting that visibility within your systems and your services within your organization. At point 2, we'll talk about the 3 approaches to implementing service maps. And I'll talk through the when, the why we'd use each of these different methods. I'll also demonstrate each one of those within our instance as well. And as we go through each of those approaches, we'll make sure to highlight the best practices and the skills needed to implement each of these approaches. So here is just a quick agenda that we have. So for number 1, we're just going to be looking at an overview of our service mapping. Again, how we can provide that value to organizations that utilize it. Those 3 service mapping approaches that we'll be talking about, namely our top-down machine learning and tag-based service mapping approaches. I want to provide you with number 3, just some resources for training paths if you want to dive into more of the fundamentals of service mapping. We'll go into the 3 configuration demos for each approach as well. And lastly, we'll end off with the takeaways and any questions that you may have at the end, as well as some additional resources that I can provide for you. All right, so what does service mapping do? So the core of service mapping is just how they give you the ability to see what configuration items or CIs support a particular business service within your organization, and also how these CIs are related. So these service maps are held directly within your CMDB, connecting your business services to your infrastructure. And as we're going down this list here, we'll start off with IT service management. How service mapping can help you in that instance is just when you have that end-to-end visibility to your services, you have much more visibility into the impact of your incidents. You can weigh in those changes, those change requests within your service desk operations, just to see whether or not you can implement that based off of the services that you're getting visibility into. You can also help your service desk teams make educated decisions utilizing service maps. And when it comes to IT operations management and AI ops, that boils down to namely monitoring. So this helps knock agents, your operations team to properly prioritize and at times even act proactively as opposed to that reactive action because they can see that impact of a down service or an outage. So for example, when you think of a service that goes down for a customer, say an email service, they don't put in a ticket that says that, that service or that Windows server went down or an Oracle database went down. They just simply say that my email is down. And without service mapping, this can pose a bit of an issue for some teams that don't have it to fix that issue. And lastly, when it comes to security and prioritizing those vulnerabilities and how to approach that, service mapping really helps you understand, which applications are customer facing and what compromises them to act quickly upon those services. So the key takeaway for this is just with utilizing service mapping, you get that increased visibility, right? So that way you're able to make better and informed decision-making when it comes to your IT landscape across your organization. All right, so we see at the top there that service mapping creates a service-oriented CMDB or a service-aware. So that's the whole goal, right, of using service maps. We want to take all of that information we see on the right here and pull that data into our service-aware CMDB, hopefully with automated methods such as discovery, but we could also use some of those third-party tools that you may already have in place to get that information ingested into your instance. So again, we mentioned the CMDB or the configuration management database, and we'll mention that a lot today because this is the foundation of where we have this data and where we have it stored, where that data comes from. And when we build out our service maps, that's all foundationally coming from our CMDB. And we saw an arrow that kind of pointed towards changes there at the end. This is where we kind of get into that with the ITSM perspective. So service maps can give you that service team visibility that they need to accelerate their processes, whether it's incident, problem, or change. And with service maps, we really see that ability, as you can see in this first bullet here, the ability to see the CIs that are affected by change requests. So if you have a change request that may affect certain services, you're given that visibility. You're also given the visibility into services that are affected by incidents as well, all within this single pane of glass for all your ITSM processes. Another use case that we hear a lot of our customers talk about is just being able to see the impact from a service that's down. So the ability to see what it means for your other applications, what it means for your other services that may have been impacted by that single server being down. And this just makes you really think more proactively as opposed to that reactive way of thinking when it comes to your business services being affected. Right. Any questions so far before we move on to our service mapping approaches? Right. I don't see any. So I'd like to spend the next bulk of our time discussing our different approaches here. And again, I said earlier, if you remember me correctly, we had 3 approaches. I know we have 4 here. That's just namely because 1 and 2 are typically used in conjunction in what we call our top-down service mapping. Tag-based service mapping we'll also learn is mostly for our cloud and container resources. And lastly, we have our machine learning approach, which we'll learn about more in detail here with these next few slides. So here, yes, choose the best approach for customers. So we'll start off with that top-down service mapping here in the middle. And what that really is is, again, that mixture of both pattern and traffic-based service mapping. So we see this typically used mostly for our on-prem and legacy applications, because this will give you the most accurate and detailed service mapping. This is typically best used on your more critical business services because of that high accuracy that it gives. Now, for our tag-based service mapping, this method builds your service maps using configured tags on your virtualized and cloud resources. And this is the more preferred approach for those containerized cloud environments. Lastly, we do have our machine learning approach, and this will give you the fastest time to value as it requires less effort on your part, because it's actually running in the background based on your discovery schedules you already have in place, and will give you a connection suggestions to build out your service maps based on the patterns that it learns over time. So you're really building, or you're running discovery over and over again. This machine learning is learning a pattern, and it will give you those connections over time, which can be very useful to some individuals. All right, now we're going to go kind of more into the pros and cons of each one, each approach. And we'll first start off with the pattern-based approach here. Again, this is the first partner of the two with that top-down service mapping approach. Now, service mapping does use patterns to discover and map out your CIs. So what a pattern is within ServiceNow is just a step-by-step set of instructions that tell Discovery exactly what to look for. So that pattern will tell Discovery, all right, you got, the host, here's what's to do next, what endpoints to look for, which attributes to find, what data points you need. I'll note that patterns are pre-built out of the box, and you can see which ones are being run from your discovery logs. But the pattern-based mapping you can think of is like casting this wider net to pull in your CI information, and CI information that's relevant for a particular service. So this method does require the most upfront effort as well, as it does depend on that horizontal discovery, those patterns that need to build out, as well as, if you read down here, some credentials needed to discover certain data points, and creating users and giving them permissions for access across your network as well. So the second piece for top-down service mapping is what we call traffic-based mapping. So this is, again, used to complement our pattern-based service mapping. And just as it sounds, it uses that, traffic-based TCP connections here between your CIs to build out our service maps. With this method, as you see here, it really casts that finer net, as it is using those traffic-based flow of connections between each CI that you see there. One thing to note, because traffic-based connections can change so frequently, and just that sheer amount of data that gets pulled in from that, sometimes we do see this method to pull in a lot of clutter and maybe even some irrelevant CIs. So best practice that we tell customers to do is to run this in conjunction with your pattern-based method for your initial discovery. And once you review your map, approve that, and we're going to take a look how we do that in our instance. You can then turn off your traffic-based method so you don't have all that extra data when you continue to run discovery in the future. Questions with those two methods before we move on to tag-based? All right, sounds good. So here again is our tag-based method. So this will be our cloud and container-based approach for service mapping. So here we're just using typical normal horizontal discovery to discover some of this tag data. It's going to be pulled into your CMDB, so those regular tag attributes like any other cloud-based attributes. And once ServiceNow has that tag data, it's going to use that in order to build out one or more services based on what it pulls in. I'd like to note here as well that with this method, tag governance is pretty much a hard requirement to utilize it. As you read here, that's just because it's if your tags aren't accurate within your cloud environment, then that tag data pulled into your ServiceNow instance obviously won't be accurate either. All right. And last but not least, we have our machine learning mapping. And what this does is really use what we call predictive intelligence to utilize this method. And what that means is that it needs training, right? So to achieve best results and to really train this type of method, you got to run discovery repeatedly. And how this works is that discovery is pulling in all of this data from all of those TCP connections and also those processes from those CIs that are discovered. And at the same time, machine learning algorithms are running in the background over all of that data, generating connection suggestions where you can implement into your service maps. And these connection suggestions can be added automatically with your connection rules, or you can review them and add them manually. As we'll see in today's demonstration, we can add those manually. But any questions with any of those approaches before we move into our instance here? All right. All right, actually, before we do that, we're going to just talk about some of the training paths. So if you do, of course, an hour of a how-to clinic isn't enough time to fully grasp the fundamentals of service mapping. So I do want to provide some of this training, is linked to this training. We have two separate methods based on your best learning style. We have the instructor-led, if you can spare a few days, that's highly recommended. But if this is also your type, that on-demand self-paced method, you can also go for that as well. They both provide you with a free voucher to take the CIS in service mapping, your Certified Implementation Specialist exam. So either way, you can get that voucher and be certified in service mapping. If not, you still have some pretty good foundational training with these links here. Right, now, moving on into the configuration of our first approach. So what's going to happen here is I just want to go over a high level step-by-step approach of each method. And then we'll hop into our instance and just repeat that same step-by-step approach, within there. So for our first step, again, this is our top-down service mapping method. Our first step, we're making sure we enable horizontal discovery, right? So we already have to have our mid server installed. We have to have it active, validated, and we have to have horizontal discovery ran so that our CMDB is nicely populated so we can use that as a data source to map out our service map from there. Number two, after we've done that, we ran horizontal discovery, we want to define our application entry point. This is exactly how you navigate to that within your instance. And for our demo, we'll just define an entry point for a single service or a single application. And once you define that entry point, it'll run top-down discovery in the background. And what's happening is from the entry point, it'll look for the host CI and whether or not it's already in your CMDB. It'll then look for any other outbound connections that the host may have until it maps all the CIs that are connected to our host, and that full service map is fully built out. And we'll see how in our instance, how we can review and approve the map once we have it built out, and possibly collaborate with service owners that need to get eyes on it before we can actually make it operational. And of course, we have to make sure these service maps are up to date, right? So we're regularly running discovery to keep those maps current. All So let's go ahead and hop into our demo instance. Hopefully you can see what I have here on my screen. Let me know in the chat if you can. All right. So again, our first step, right, was to map out our top-down discovery. So in our instance here, we are within our map application services, actually on our second step right now. So we're really assuming that we've done our step one and that's already completed. You know, we configured our mid server, we ran horizontal discovery, and our CMDB is fully populated with our CIs. So right now we're starting on our second step, and how I got here was I like to just hit service mapping. Then we have our application services right here. So in order to, for our next step to establish that entry point, we're just going to hit new here. All right. So here we can create a new service. We'll give it a name of Movieplex. And we need to create a service owner. And we can do anybody. Let's do Abraham Lincoln for laughs and giggles. And now at this point, we can look at the right here, and this is all the common entry points that you can add to your services. I can also go to other applications and just show you like every single entry point that we have available. But I know that the service that we're going to build out today in particular is running on WebLogic. So we'll use an HTTP endpoint in order to do that and add that. So I have my URLs ready to go here, so I can add. And for this service, I know that we have 2 entry points that I have to define. Of course, when you're defining these service maps, the more information you have, the better. And typically you would get this information from your service owner. Again, we'll go to our HTTP endpoint here and define our URL there. All right, and from there, we'll just go ahead and input that into our system by clicking save. Now, once I do click save, what's happening in the background is that service mapping is actually running. So it's already building our service map. And hopefully, since this is horizontal discovery has been ran, our CMDB is already populated with the CIs, it should be fairly quick. But before we look at our map here, I want to just point out some of the fields that we have. Upon creating our service, we can denote its business criticality. We'll keep that at 4. I want you to note our operational status here. This is going to come into play when we review our service map. So right now we have it at non-operational. Let's go ahead and view our service map now. All right. All right, so here we have our fully built out service map, just based off of those endpoints that we provided to it. So here we have our endpoints again. You can see some of the data on here on the right, some of the CIs that were built out with it as well, automatically coming out of our CMDB. So now, at this point, as a service owner, we can send this to review. But for right now, we can go ahead and approve this service map. After we're reviewing all the connections, making sure everything's good to go, we'll go ahead and approve that. And upon going back to our table and looking into our service map here, you can see how our operational status changed from non-operational to operational upon approving that service map. Right there. All right, so in the last step that we went over in our presentation was just maintaining our discovery schedules, right? To make sure that this data doesn't go stale, these service maps stay current. So we'll go into our discovery schedules here. And we're making sure that these discovery schedules are within our service mapping module, not our discovery module, because these are all going to be the schedules pertaining to our service mapping. And here we have two out of the box schedules that we'll use. But namely, our all applications one is the one that will run our top-down discovery for all the applications that are associated with the service map at whatever we designated to run at. Right now, defaulted to daily, but we can change this to whatever we like, on a week by week basis, month to month basis, on demand, what have you. So that's how you keep your data up to date with these schedules. Any questions with that before we move back into our presentation and go into our next approach? All right. So going back. So again, we just finished our top-down service mapping method. Now let's take a look at our tag-based service maps. So here again, step one, same as before, we still need to enable horizontal discovery. We still have to have those active and validated mid servers, right? Because that's important for step two, because we need that, that accurate tag data from our cloud resources in order to build out our tag-based service maps. Without running that cloud-based discovery, we're not going to be able to do that, right? Number three, we'll walk through in our environment how we can define our tag families. And that starts off with first defining your tag keys, your tag values, as well as your tag categories as well. Then once you define your tag families, you'll be able to select service candidates from your tag-based recommendations. And then again, we're going to regularly run discovery to keep your service map current. Okay, let's hop into this one. And here, I just really want to show you, to start off, what data should look like on your cloud resources as you're pulling them in. So I'm going into our cloud resources dashboard here, get an idea of the cloud resources within my environment. And I do have several AWS EC2 instances that I can look into. All right, and we'll just click on this first one here. And here, we're just looking at a CMDB view of this particular EC2 instance, right? But here at the bottom, this is where it's important. This is where we're seeing our tag keys. And then these are some of the common key types that you'll see. Most common ones are like name, environment, but we also have operating system, application, and there are associated tag values as well here on the right. But once we do have that tag data within our CMDB, we can kind of start our process of configuring our families, our categories as well. But how do we get this tag data? Let me show you the discovery pattern, because that's exactly how we're pulling that into our ServiceNow instance. Now, the particular one that we're looking for is just our AWS inventory tags. So this particular pattern is what's important to bring those tag data in. So here, as you scroll through, I know it's a lot to kind of take in, but all in all, what this does is really just helping that discovery process when you're trying to map out your services automatically. You're going to need this to pull that data in from an AWS environment, because it's telling discovery exactly how to look for particular tag keys, how to look for particular tag values when we scan that AWS environment from our cloud discovery process. So it's all from here. And usually these are provided to us out of the box. You don't typically, you can build these out yourself, but a lot of times we can provide these, especially for our more common cloud resources like AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. But now that we've seen how we get these tag attributes, let's go and try to map out our service, starting off with our tag-based services here. So this is pretty similar to what we saw with our MoviePlex application, right? So those were all applications within our instance. This is just merely our tag-based applications. So we only have 8 here. One we're focused on for today is our recommendation prod. And I just want you to take note of the naming convention. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. So recommendation : prod. And we'll just look at the map view of this. So 2 things to note, again, was that naming convention. And as we look at this map view, I just want you to see and take a look at how this service map is built out, right? So it's pretty similar to what we had earlier. You know, we have those connections to each CI, maybe a little different CIs because it's a different service between the two, but all in all, it looks pretty much the same. So what I want to do is show you exactly how this was created. And to do that, I'm going to delete it. I want to build out how to, build this out, or show how to build this out end to end for you. All right, so we can just ignore the warning and delete. All right, and then the first step that I mentioned was looking into our CI tag categories from our high-level overview. So to do that, we'll go into our service mapping CI tag categories here. And here is our tag categories for in our environment, right? So application services and environment tag categories are namely the most common ones. We also have Kubernetes here. But let's click on application services. And let's talk about some of these mapping key names. So once we've defined our tag keys that we're looking for within discovery, we also want to define some of these tag keys that may be used across different teams. And these can actually mean the same thing, even though they're, app service, application, these all kind of mean the same thing within this tag category. And this is where we define those for your cloud resource tag environments. Once we do configure these and define these, we need to next look into our tag-based service families. So categories or service families are next. And again, we'll just look into our application services. And we see those 2 common categories that we saw in our last step, right? Application services, you see environment here. And in a tag family, we're really defining the logic that we're using in the mapping process. So I'm telling it that we want to see a combination of tag values for the application service that's tagged for my resources. And also I want to see the value for the environment. So what we're going to have is application service, then our environment. And we can kind of see more examples of that down here at the bottom. We have our services in our environment, concatenated behind that. And once we have our service families set up, our system is going to give us some service candidates to view based off of that tag attribute data. All right, so we have a few here. Again, it's the same naming convention because it's going to be based off of this service categories here. But as we scroll down, we can see the same recommendation prod service that we had earlier that we deleted. You can go ahead and map that. And this should be pretty quick because, again, this is all in our CMDB. It's been populated with our horizontal discovery. All right, so here we go. We have our map services, our new map services here at the bottom. You can click into that. And under our related links, we're just going to recalculate our service because this is going to reflect the latest CI tags changes and those CI connections as well. All right, so that's recalculated. We'll go back to our other view so we can see the map itself. And hopefully it looks exactly how we had it before we deleted it to show how we built this out end to end. There we go. Looks pretty much exactly the same as what we had before. All right, any questions with our tag-based method, our tag-based approach here? All right, let's hop back into our presentation and finish it off with our machine learning service mapping. Right. All right, so here again is our last method, machine learning. And our first step is there's a little change here, namely, because we need to ensure that this property, connection suggestions is active and that is set to true within our sys properties table. I know with a few of our last releases that this is set and defaulted to disabled. So this is pretty important to use this method to just verify that this is true, set to active. So you can go into step 2 and enable some of those connection suggestions. So again, for step 2, our connection suggestions that we receive by mapping in this method can be automatically used or connected, or we can review them and add those manually. So that's kind of why this is optional. Again, in our demonstration, we're going to review those and add those in manually, but you definitely have the option to create those connections automatically. At step 3, we're going to review the application fingerprint suggestions. And these are going to be entire applications that machine learning thinks that you might have within your environment that you haven't exactly mapped out yet. So not only is it giving you connection suggestions, it's also giving you suggestions for entire applications based off of some of those CI connections that it finds within Discovery. And again, we're running Discovery to keep your service mapping current. last but not least, I'm going to take a look at our machine learning service mapping. And what we'll do, we'll go back into our map application services and go back to our movie Plex application. We'll view this map here. This one has quite a few suggestions that machine learning has picked up on. Even though we have just mapped that one out. Right. So again, from that first step, once we set that property to true, once we set it to active, what we're getting is this UI action here, this button for connection suggestions. Now, again, I don't currently have those automatic apply rules set or those automatic connection rules set. So we'll have to manually review these and decide whether or not to add them to our service map. So we can even, if there's some connections that are connected previously, we can exclude them if we need to do so as well. Or we can reset some of those decisions made. As we look at this data here, we can see the source CIs, the connections, the target hosts, some of the confidence levels that machine learning has picked up on. So this is just giving you a confidence level based on how relevant this connection is to the service map that you're currently looking at. So just based off of some of these confidence levels, I'll click on a few of these and then add those manually into our service map. And then once we go back to our service map here, all right, you can already see some of those connections being built out from the ones that we manually added. All right, yeah. So yeah, we have some connections added to our service now, but any questions with this before I move on to our application fingerprints? All right, so that's the last thing I want to talk about is application fingerprints, right? So what we'll do to navigate to that is our discovery homepage. And we're looking for a particular widget here, application fingerprints. Click into that. We can look into our all suggested applications. So again, just like how machine learning was giving us suggestions for connections within our service map, it's also given us suggestions for whole applications based off of relevant CIs that it's discovering. And so I can kind of just go into one of these here. And this is kind of important. I can tell you why it's useful. It's namely useful for things like homegrown applications. And that's just because there are 3 basic things that Discovery does need to even map out applications, right? So it needs a class to know where it falls within our CMDB. It also needs those patterns to get those attributes and that other data that it's pulling into our CMDB. And then finally, it needs a process classifier to map the right processes to your applications. And most of the time, like in our application that we built our MoviePlex application, we already have those instructions built out within our patterns. But for those smaller homegrown applications, you might have to build those out yourself manually, and that can take a lot of time. But as we drill into one of our suggested applications here, we can see some of those things already populated for us. So we can see that CMDB CI class already populated for us. Number three, we needed a pattern. So it has a suggested pattern to use for this application, as well as that process classifier rule that we can use for this application. So all with machine learning. So machine learning is trying to give you suggestions for connections, applications, and really make your day easier to use. So any questions with that before we kind of end it with our presentation? All right. All right. In conclusion, we saw some of the value that we can get out of service mapping, right? We saw how, given that visibility into your systems, into your services, you can really lead a more proactive as opposed to reactive approach to your service operations. Now, we discussed some of the methods, approaches of service mapping, namely our top-down, our tag-based, and our machine learning approaches, and the pros and cons for each of those. We saw how we implement those, some of the best practices and skills needed within our instance to use those as well. And hopefully with this presentation, with this webinar, what you get out of this is just the ability to kind of build out your own service maps within your own organization. And if anything, at the least, you have a resource to go to, a recording, a slide deck. I'll send this to you afterwards, just to look back to in order to help you to do that. And when it comes to additional resources, again, we have links that I provided to you, some YouTube links, some up-to-date documentation, and of course, our product page here at the bottom. And with that, that really is everything that I had to cover today. I'm just going to stay on the line for a few minutes just in case any questions come through. But after the call, I'll make sure to send out that slide deck, send out the recorded video so you have it for your own reference. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for participating today, and hopefully you have a great rest of your day. Take care.